All right, we're going to take a look at Midi. One of the first things I want to tell you is that for me, Midi is very basic. I use Midi for composing, and sometimes I'll use it for real-time work that I'm doing in the studio. But almost always it's work, something that's in progress that, is going to get worked on further. So for me, like I've said, the Midi is a very basic tool that I use for those applications, because most of the time that I work on basic structures with Midi and, the connection to my keyboard or whatever other device that I might be using, that its functions that I use it for are very basic, because once I get it in there and I'm working with this Midi file that I've constructed, that from there I start working on it with the actual capabilities that you're able to in a piano roll editor or other applications for manipulating Midi data. And then at some point that gets turned into an audio file, and then a lot of times, a whole lot of the work that I may be doing on that is going to be done as an audio file when I get done with all the very basics of it. So, like I said, for me, it's a very simple application, and I am not a Midi guru at this point. So we're going to go through the basics of Midi and address some of the basics. And so that I hope that by the time this video is over, that you've got some information that you can branch out from to use it. I mean, it has a lot of applications that are very cool. But you're going to want to approach this from what am I going to use this for, and then approach how you're going to apply it to your needs and your specific situation is very much going to depend how deep you get into it. So let's take a look at Midi. All right, the first two basic things about Midi that I think are very pertinent to address at first would be protocol and format, because basically those two things contain for the most part what Midi is. Some of the things about it and some of the piano roll editors, we'll get into a whole lot of that stuff, but the foundations of it, relate back to the protocol and to the formatting. So let's take a real quick. We understand that protocol is basically it's like a language set up between two different people or two different systems, a computer and a keyboard, or however it's set up, so that those things can communicate. So when something says, patch bay 2, that the other thing understands what's going on and what it's talking about. So, basically that's a real basic understanding of protocol. So let's take a real quick look at, the communication protocol that they've set up for MIDI devices to communicate with each other. All right, some of the most basic fundamentals of the MIDI protocol, first of all, is that it has 16 channels. So you have 16 channels that, can be routed in different configurations. So any one of those channels can be routed somewhere else. So, that's the first thing to look at, is that, it's set up so that you have 16 separate channels. The other part of it, we'll take a real quick look at part of it, is that, it's sent between 0 and 255. And if you watch that video that I put on here about digital signals, that you'll understand that's unsigned. It doesn't have a positive or negative value on it. So the information is being sent that way from 0 to 255 and converted into binary information, or back and forth, whichever way you want to look at it. And the MIDI commands are separated in two ways. The first part of it is that if it's got a 0 at the front of it, then it's a data byte, and if it's got a 1, then it's command byte. So that's the first part of it. So, and it's also set up so that the first part of it is a command. It's got a command or it's got data, and the second half of the binary information for that command is set up to where it tells you what channels it's being sent on. So that's a very first basic understanding of the first part of its protocol. All right, one of the first protocol messages is note on, turning the note, or note off, turning the note off, and then turning the note on. Aftertouch would be, pressure. difference of pressure on the key, so that it acts differently, or things that can happen after a key's pushed, what kind of effects might be happening. Continuous controller, that's going to send messages about anytime any parameter has been changed or adjusted on the MIDI controller. Patch change, sound change, it's got 128 different patches on it, that are set up to where, you've got like drums or keyboards and there's 128 of them. So that channel or that command is set aside to tell you what patch you're playing. Channel pressure. Channel pressure, basically, it's a command that says if you've hit like a note and aftertouch, is a little bit different. Is you understand the aftertouch, sensitivity, velocity of the note, and things like that, and what happens after you hit the note. And channel pressure basically affects everything on the channel, so it's not just one note. Any notes that might be hit, if it's pressed again, that channel pressure command is going to affect all the notes, no matter what, everything that's being sent on the MIDI file. And then pitch bend. Understand pitch bend on your MIDI controller. More like you've seen a pitch bend knob or something like that. So that command is set aside for that. And non-musical commands. And basically that gets a little bit more complex. That we're starting to talking about system-specific commands and a few others. So let's take a real quick look at those. All right, the basic functions of the system messages, as far as I can tell, that, from my understanding and from looking at them a little bit, as you have start a system exclusive message telling you that there's a system message coming, or it's the start of it. A MIDI time code that has 24 pulses per quarter note to set the system time, so that there's timing and there's a time code set with the actual file. Song position and pointer, where it's telling you where in the song that it's at. Song select for selecting different songs on a MIDI keyboard or something in some system that has songs set up in it. Tune request to tune the tune the oscillators. End of system message. Time clock, a real time clock, which we'll look at a little bit better. Start system real time. Continue where you stopped, and stop. And then you have active sensing that keeps a continuous message going around that says that they're connected. And then a system reset, which resets the entire system. The other part of it is the system exclusive commands, that they are set up so that whatever manufacturer might set up commands differently so that they can have communication between their products, or products that will accept their commands any way they want, with any type of controllers or any type, whatever they might have changed from the basic commands and or basic patches or anything like that might be in the file. It could be anything, and they're basically system exclusive that are set up from the manufacturer. So the MIDIs are supposedly broken up into two kinds: channel messages and system messages that we've already addressed. The thing about system messages is that those system messages we talk about can be broken into system common, system real time, and system exclusive that we've talked about. And so I think that we've addressed them pretty well. I think it's more pertinent to understand a lot of those things as they might be happening in the system that you're working in, which seems very obvious. Most of the things that I use, any of the stuff that we've talked about so far, that most of it's pretty obvious. So there are some things there that might be very specific to a piece of hardware or software that you're working on that you might want to basically address as system exclusive messages and things, and how they might have changed from the original protocol. And so that basically gives a fairly basic outline of the protocol and how it's formatted or how it's structured so that if you have specific uses you want to use it for, that the actual structure seems pretty basic. From some of the reading I've done, it seems that there's a whole bunch of other actual protocols that you can use that we'll address farther as we go along, but the actual basic protocol is pretty simple for them to connect, and actual specific things that you might be addressing you can address from the areas that we spoke of, and you're going to have to figure out exactly how that is actually working in the system that you're working in with the software and hardware that might be connected in your system. So that's a pretty basic look at the protocol. And the MIDI protocol it's used to send the messages that specify the notation, pitch, velocity, control signals for parameters, for such as volume, vibrato, panning, cues and clock signals, sets tempo and things like that. So it's a very basic thing. It can trigger sound modules, and you can set it up to where it's setting information into sequencers. So basically that's a pretty good basic outline of it. And I think that most of the basic protocol is set up so that, like I had talked about how I used it, that you don't have to get into it too deep if you don't want to. A basic understanding of it, and then it's set up to do some fairly complex things that you're just going to figure out how to configure those things, or how you might use a different protocol for a system, or maybe some of your systems may use slightly different protocols that we'll take a look at. So it seems pretty obvious that the actual protocol is fairly basic. I did some looking around on it on some of the more complex uses of it that we're going to get into a little bit more deeply as we go along through this. But the actual basic protocol and the concepts behind it and the structure of it are pretty basic for you to address for whatever type of applications you might be using it for. And it's basically set up fairly well to where, if you're like me and you're not using it for anything too complex, that it's very easy to use like that. And it's also set up to where it can do some complex things, and the actual structure of the protocol is set up to where you can actually go and address those issues fairly specifically from inside of the protocol and in certain areas. So that we're going to look at some more complexities of that, but the basic protocol, I think that kind of outlines it pretty well. There's some issues that I read about that we didn't address that we're more likely to address as we go along, but we just kind of wanted to take a basic look at it. So that's about what we're going to look at about that for now, and then we're going to go on to looking at the format, MIDI file formats. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next video, and we'll talk a little bit about MIDI file formats.